Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our Q&A session. We had a very intensive 4 presentations, several demos, a lot of questions, and now it's time to answer them. So you still have a chance in our Q&A panel to put the questions to our speakers. But before, while you're doing that, let me again to say hello to all the guys who are joining today. Right now, Saurabh, Juriy, Marcos, and Bogdan. So I see you, everybody here. That's great to see. So, gentlemen, let's start from the questions that I gathered together from your speeches, and the first question goes to Marcos, and I will ask also Juriy to join the discussion on this question. So, Marcos, the question is about, of course, login library. So, what is which logger library which you recommend to use and why? And here is a question to Juriy. Juriy, from what you were showing and what you are using in your everyday job in terms of logger library, if any. So I would like you to have the complex answer from different perspectives, if you can.
Yeah, sure. So, well, it depends, as everything, I think. Personally, as I said in the talk, I really enjoyed using the Log4j. JS. It has a really nice API, but I saw in some comments that some people have some constraints about performance and so on. So in such case, I believe Pino.js is the best one because it would you can stream a lot of logs and it will cost the bare minimum. In the opposite, the other libraries, they are not that optimized for such flow. But if you need really high performance, Pino.js is the best from my perspective. But in general, Log4j is quite nice to use as well. That's the one that I like.
Juriy, what are you using?
Sure. So in our team, again, I worked with quite a few projects that had different approaches to logging. So the one that I'm currently working with, we did not go with like a platform agnostic logging, let's put it this way. So we have the setup that I mentioned on one of my slides. So what we are doing, we're collecting the logs with the FluentD for the later aggregation, and we're in fact using FluentD as our logging solution, right? So, but again, the solution that right now I'm working with is both Java and Node.js. So there is an SLF4j, which is the Java solution for logging as well. But yeah, for me, FluentD, for us, FluentD is kind of working quite well in terms of fault tolerance and distribution of the logs and aggregation of the logs.
I see. Juriy, and actually to continue and to build on your story, on your demo, there is an opinion in the audience that the easiest Node.js deployment can be on Heroku. What do you think about it, about this, that it's the easiest way to deploy on Heroku?
First of all, I want to say thank you to Heroku for sponsoring this event. I've heard this mentioned a couple of times in the presentation. Yes, it is, right? But now you will ask the natural question, and what was my presentation about? Why didn't I show Hello World on Heroku, right? So, and that's, again, all the interesting questions, they're having answer. That depends on what you need and what you want, right? So the real difference started to become much more obvious once your application is slightly more complex than just a hello world, right? So once you need a message broker, you want to choose Kafka, RabbitMQ, or ZeroMQ. You need a caching solution. You need a database. You may want to install some additional tools for those server-side components that you run. With the platforms like Heroku, even though they are great, still you have this limited selection of tools that are pre-built for you. And the great thing is that they are managed for you as well. So you don't have to care what happens if your Kafka cluster goes down. It's Heroku's headache, right? You just use it, messages go, it works, right? But if you want to be in a full control of your environment, if you want to install the tool specifically that you want, then this kind of a setup will give you more freedom to do so, right? Besides, there was some argument about the costs that Heroku is free, and my stupidly expensive server is like it's $5, right? So yeah, the cost will be slightly different once you add the storage, once you add the databases and a couple of more tools. So if you calculate it for the like a regular project, couple of Node.js instances, MongoDB and a message broker, right? Just compare the costs. I think that the picture will not be such like a black and white thing. So analyze what you need. If your application is indeed fitting Heroku plan, if it's just like one key for you to deploy and run, just use it. You don't need anything else. But if you feel like, well, it's getting a bit tight, you want something that you don't have right out of the box, just consider using your own dedicated server for that.
Totally agree. Complete answer. Thank you. Yeah.
Maybe I can just add one thing. It's also important to remember if you're like in a small company and you don't have a dedicated team to, like a small startup, and you don't have a dedicated team for DevOps and manage those things. Yeah, in that case, Heroku will pay off, even if you need to go to further paid plans and so on, because the cost of the acquisition for the knowledge in a team and managing those things, it's pretty.
You just need to find that fine point when the costs for the service becomes higher than the cost for the team, and that's when you need to reconsider. But yes, managing is a big thing, right? So complex DevOps costs lots of money, right? So like even if you have the complex deployment, right, you want to use AWS and you want to hire a couple of AWS guys to help you with the service, that's going to cost like, well, months, years of Heroku.
Absolutely. Bogdan, I see you are shaking the head. What are you using?
Well, to be honest, at least in last couple of months, I've been working with a really big system, and we used things like Splunk for dumping the logs. And when it comes to so back to the logs question, when it comes to the microservice itself, we could use our own loggers as long as we standardize it to JSON, and they'll pick it up for us. So you could use, I use things like Winston, and it works fine. In terms of deployment, at least what we have at Klarna is quite of a complex, what you mentioned, complex development built by the AWS guys. So I use it as a platform, let's say in the same way we use things like Heroku with a manifest file, but it's kind of built for us because we have a lot of requirements in terms of data privacy that are super strict. So it's quite hard to rely on third parties. We need to be certified and so on. And AWS, it's still a good solution for this kind of scale. But again, we are 300 teams. There's a lot of microservices. It makes sense to invest in something like that. If not, I do a lot of Heroku, to be honest, when I deploy Node.js, because it's just simple. And for personal projects and so on, it's pretty good. Once you go into enterprise, I think what Juriy mentioned, it's a pretty good analysis.
Well, our audience actually is looking for silver bullet. Marcos, how about Graylog for logging Node.js application?
Well, Graylog, I used it a few years ago. It was quite great, but it is mainly based on Java, and depending on the machine that you are working on to host it, it might be costly because you need a more powerful machine to handle that and to store the logs and so on. So it's nice. I don't know how it's nowadays, like in details, but it was really nice. It has the whole solution in one place that you could use and deliver it to and see what's happening on your system and so on. It's fine. Nowadays I'm using more the Elastic stack, even the managed one in the Elastic. And it also worked great, and I don't need to manage it.
And Marcos, how would you recommend to choose which level can developers use for which situation? How to choose to debug, warn, or error? Can you suggest the approach to use for the developer?
Yeah. So Mostly, I can say how I use it.
That's what we're looking for.
If you are looking for something in case of, for example, you have some try-cat in your code and you're returning some error in that try-cat, if you can retry that, it could be just a simple warning in that case. But if it's throwing an error in your system for that given action, it's blocking the end user or something like that, it needs to be some error, or if you have something configured in I'm saying that because usually when you have some error in your system, you can you configure it to dispatch some alert to your team to take a look on that. But if you configure it for other level, would be that case. For info level, it could be just simple information for you to see how the system is going. For example, the inputs for, depending on the system itself, the input for that, or just information that would make the system that you see in the system. If you want to debug something that, I see some problem here, then in the bug level you would use like much more information on that, like lots of the input, the line by line of what's happening. If you think that information would be important, this enter in this part of the code, the data that coming in and coming out and getting out is this one. So that would be the case for a debug. And by default, info would be the best one to ship to production.
Marcus, and how do you save logs, on file or that database?
I just send it to std out, and I have another application that's getting those logs and sending to somewhere else. For example, to Elasticsearch.
Yeah.
I'll add a little bit. So from my experience, the good approach to defining the error level itself is that error is something actionable, right? That the person, as was mentioned, it usually causes the alert. It should cause the alert. Otherwise, why do you care about the errors, right? So error is something that a person can react on and usually have to react on, right? But with the lower level logs, it's slightly more like it's freer to choose what is where. But the fatal one or the error one, what is the higher ones, is just something that somebody needs to go check it out, look at what's wrong.
If you take a look into the syslog specification, you see that they have something like 9 or 10 log levels that you can use, and they have some descriptions of where you should use such case. But in fact, you would mostly use this for like error warning, info, and debug for most of the things in your system.
Guys, and for our audience, for junior developers, so should they consider like creating their own custom logger function, or to look for any third-party modules? So what is the best way on which stage of developing the applications testing?
First, you create your own logger function to learn, and then once you figure out how you did it, you switch back to industrial one. So
yeah,
well, that's the question. I mean, if you want to wrap the implementation, I mean, we're not talking about creating your logging framework, right? Don't do that. The motivation here, maybe you want to hide the details of which logger framework you're using in your application, so that later you can decide to use the other one and switch without, because logging is something very invasive. It goes through all of your files, right? So if you're importing something in all of your files and you're using specific function in all of your files, the refactoring may be quite huge. While if you wrap it in your own custom function just to create this layer of indirection, that will make the refactoring and switching to the other log strategy easier in the future. But don't create your own frameworks.
Besides for learning purposes, it's like it's better to use something that is battle tested and so on. If you find some really weird edge case that there's nothing in the market that handle that for you, then you write your own. But it can be applied to anything in engineering.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Bogdan, so you started today's morning blog, let's say European blog. The question comes to you, how do you deal with the latency between microservices? Martin is asking if he's right to assume that the security impact there is even more than usual latency.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and that's one of the problems when we build these microservices is that everything. So basically, the reaction to the end user depends usually on 5 or 10 calls downstream, and so the latency accumulates, and that's why there's a new switch towards either doing more of a modular monolith that we separate as the same way we separate microservices, but it still lives in the same application. So you remove that latency, or going towards an event more of an event managed system where you can design totally different what you give back to the user. So latency becomes less important. So you can manage it not necessarily by reducing it, but by giving user feedback much faster. That would be my answer on the latency. What was the security question?
Well, the security question was, so is it correct to assume with the security impact there is even more than usual latency?
Well, I guess that highly depends. I think authentication, at least at HTTP level, it's quite fast. So I don't think, unless you're doing something really specific in your authentication logic between services, service-to-service communication, and authentication, it's usually quite fast, especially because the services, they live together in the same network or in the same VPC. So the latency is quite reduced. And also we usually communicate over HTTP between services. So you don't necessarily need HTTPS. So you get a lot of speed from that. But as I said before, you're limited by the protocol itself. Right, so there's only as much as you can do. If there's 5 calls and you have to wait for a response stream to all of them, you are much better off just triggering an event and awaiting for reactions to special actors to that event, rather than having this waterfall call in the microservice. So that's how you deal it. So there's a theoretic limit that you have in the end if you have 5 services when you make a request. So that's why we go to event, yeah. And
just straight to your topic, and you have mentioned the REST. So is GraphQL a framework on top of REST? It does mean that it's completely replaced REST, or what does it mean?
So the question REST and GraphQL, it's been around for a long time. GraphQL, it's a new approach to how we fetch and query data, and it's not related to the REST protocol. So basically, you can develop a REST API, or you can go with GraphQL. They are they substitute each other. And if services are really small, then you are better off with REST, because having a description of your data in a graph that you can explore doesn't give a lot of value when you only have a few calls. Let's say you just have a service that sends an email and sends back a success or success or failure and a bit more info. You can do that with the REST API perfectly, right? But as things scale in your service, you might want to expose to your clients your data in a much more transparent way, and that's where GraphQL comes in. So I would recommend GraphQL for anything that has clients that deal with a lot of data, especially when it comes to front end.
Yeah, maybe one comment.
Yeah.
Sorry for interrupting again. One thing that's nice also about GraphQL, that you can still use REST on some kind of underlying services and expose the GraphQL to the end user. So, for example, I know that's quite simple in Apollo on the server and also on the client side to just expose the GraphQL for the end user or the front end guys. And behind the scenes, you can fetch the REST services and expose some kind of API gateway and use the GraphQL this way.
And this is one of the patterns that I also saw a couple of times and used as well. The rationale behind it also falls into the backend for front-end pattern, right? So if you have the set of the microservices that are front-end agnostic, and you may have several different front ends requiring different kind of user journeys, requiring different data with different views and aggregations, right? Here's where GraphQL comes really handy, because your services are bound to the domains, right? And they are exposing specific REST APIs, while the GraphQL backend for front-end layer is like shaping that data in the way that it is most consumable by a specific UI, by a specific client.
And you don't need to migrate everything at once. You can do it gradually.
Yeah, so those are both great points, but back to the latency question, be careful when you have the GraphQL on top of REST, that's extra latency. So if you would have GraphQL natively in that service and expose you as a schema, you gain speed. So as Marcos mentioned, the advantage is you don't have to migrate, but you get latency. So you got to balance those things. If you don't need something super fast, just don't migrate. And if you do, then you probably have to migrate.
We have plenty of questions on GraphQL, so I would continue that. From Tiago, based on his experience with Apollo GraphQL subscription, is that documentation is a mess and packages are no longer maintained. So it was really like hard work to set up. What was your experience with that?
I guess, yeah, documentation is really limited on Apollo subscription. So what you do is fall back a lot on the knowledge we have on WebSockets, which are widely documented because they have been used a lot. Because in the end, the Apollo subscription package underlies, it's based on the WebSockets standard. So you can easily understand what Apollo wrapped on top and then kind of figure your way out. But yes, the documentation is not super mature. Also, because I think so real-time event-driven systems are still in the making, except you are building something for analytics or so. If we look at the apps we use and the software we use every day, we are still far away from extreme real-time for wide use. Maybe people like things like AWS have real-time, but in general, adoption is quite slow, and so there's not a lot of people working with it. But I think we are closely getting there. So if you see problems, just go to the WebSockets library and try to understand how Apollo is building on top of it.
Thanks, Bogdan. Marcos, Juriy, quiz questions to you. Again, our audience looking for the bullet, silver bullet. So, Marcos, could you please tell what exactly makes Pinot that fast in a few words?
It uses a different approach to handle the streams in Node.js. It don't rely only on the stream, the std out stream, but they have Matteo Collina. It has some other library. I don't remember exactly the name. I started it some time ago, but it's the way that it handled the streams to sending it to std out makes it much faster.
Cool. Juriy, question to you.
Sure. Should.
Question is very easy. What would you choose? Amazon Web Services, EC2?
But EC2 is...
Or DigitalOcean?
Okay, right. So again...
I know you partly answered this question, but still...
No, I didn't, right? So let's guys be clear, right? If there always be the answer, I would, for any question at all, AWS, DigitalOcean, Azure, Google Cloud, Apple's, Oranges, etc. If there would be always answer, I would choose A no matter what. Then the other options would just not exist, right? So that A option would be just so amazing that you do not need anything else in your life to satisfy your needs, right? So depending on the project, the different features may be required to you, right? So you need to assess how much of the AWS features do you have to use. The AWS will be slightly more expensive in general than DigitalOcean, for example, for hosting instances. But again, with AWS, you're getting all these additional services. You're having EKS, you're getting managed Kafka, you've got managed databases, you've got S3, you got like email sending. Like there's I think it's around 300 services that you're getting in that package with AWS, right? Then the next question, like, do you want to lock yourself with AWS, or you want to be what is called cloud agnostic, right? So you want to host on the cloud, but have a freedom to move later to the other cloud, right? So you're paying by not paying attention at all at the cloud features, but then you can migrate, right? So depending on the cloud, again, depending on the project scale, right? If you're talking about the generic project, go with the approach that will give you the best quality attributes of the project that you're looking for, right? So if you have the dedicated DevOps team, you're quite or you're quite familiar with what you're doing, DigitalOcean will work just fine. If you're feeling like it's a bit of a hard time to configure and manage all those, maybe look for the managed services, right? But at the end of the day, the question is what your project needs. Because if you go in a larger scale, if you start thinking about, there was mentioned data locality, data privacy, the encryption at rest, all those features will make sense. Now, the availability of a certain data centers, right? So I'll give you a very quick example. If you're working with a financial application and you want to store the data in Switzerland, you need to have 2 data centers that are sufficiently far away so that if the natural disaster occurs, the data will not be completely lost, right? Now, if you want to be compliant with this kind of requirements, naturally, you are limited to the options that physically have the data centers in 2 different locations. So you can say, yes, I am compliant, right? Your customer data and all your credit history will not be lost if there is a thunderbolt striking in a data center, or there is a flood, or something else happens, right? So, but again, this is a little bit higher enterprise level project that you need to start thinking about these things, right? For you, just start with a simple evaluation. What do you want from it? Try working with AWS, see if you can save yourself headache of offloading management of the services to AWS, right? You don't need to care about the backups, the safety of your data, the replication of your data across the globe. Is it valuable for you? If yes, try it out, see how much it costs. Will it be easier for you to build this infrastructure yourself? Yes, no. So this kind of questions you're asking if you're planning this deployment. And again, if you're talking about spending like a $20 a month budget, $50 a month budget, $100 a month budget, I mean, usually you don't care, right? Once you start to have the bigger projects where the features start to matter, that's where when these decisions really make much more sense, right? So for now, just try using what is more convenient to you. Sorry, that was a long answer, but there's no silver bullet. Sorry, guys. If you find one, come to me and tell me.
Yeah.
Juriy, thank you that you are giving the answer from different angles with insights. Because the attendees on our track for juniors, we are very much in the learning curve. So thank you very much for being so detailed and from different angles, which is the most valuable piece, I suppose, from all the answers. So before we close our Q&A session, there is like one final question which comes to the Marcus, just to make not a summary, but still some recommendations. So what would you suggest for passing request context across the logs?
Yeah, so in Node.js, usually it has it mostly out of the box if you have it. In their documentation, there are quite good information about that as well. As I'm using Log4j, you can create some kind of layouts on top of it that you can pass some information saved somewhere to the logging itself, and then you can process it. You can enrich this before sending it to somewhere.
Thank you. Guys, Saurabh, Juriy, Bogdan, Marcos, you are awesome. Thank you for sharing. As I always say, sharing is caring, and this is what we need on our junior track. Thank you for being with us today. Thank you for your contribution to the community development, and have a great rest of the Sunday, and hope one day to see you on our next conferences. Dear audience, we're gonna have our last block of speeches, which are 2 just in 10 minutes. So we have a break. Guys, thank you very much. We very much appreciate your contribution to the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.